welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C., and we're testing out a slightly improved technical version of the show, so please bear with us. I am actually hearing an echo of what I say. Edifying though this is, probably not the best setup. But now let's look at this panorama of world breakdown crisis, chaos across the world, the dangers of war. This is the darkling plain swept by confused alarms where ignorant armies clash by night. It all grows out of the 2008 world economic depression, the world derivatives panic unleashed by Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, and the entirety of the zombie banks. But it's now complicated by the universal destabilization launched by the Anglo-Americans, the CIA, MI6, all the rest, DGSE, BND, declaring war on the nation state and attempting to balkanize the world, to smash every existing nation and reduce it to some petty, squabbling principality, impotent in the face of ExxonMobil, J.P. Morgan Chase, and so forth. So we're very far down the line. And we've got some interesting developments, and I urge people not to simply lapse into sloganeering. I've been watching somehow the Workers' World Party and their various spin-offs, the Answer Coalition, Youth Against War and Fascism. They seem to exercise a preponderant influence in the international cable news coming from the United States. And naturally, these are your Stalinists of 1956. So it's good to hear from them, but we'd like to hear from somebody else, too. And naturally, whenever the U.S. does anything, they're the first ones to condemn it, which much of the time is going to be okay, but maybe not all the time. And here's the complication. The imperialist policy runs into these kinds of contradictions. You have to imagine a crazy, an Islamist fanatic, a jihadi, a mujj, who was in Benghazi. He was one of the people that Gaddafi would have relieved us of. But of course, back in March 2011, as Gaddafi was approaching Benghazi, we had NATO airstrikes urged on by Bernard-Henri Lévy, by Sarkozy, and then by Samantha Power and Susan Rice and the rest of these people, Michael McFaul. And they saved all of those crazies, those fanatics. And they then were, of course, transshipped under the supervision of Ambassador Stevens and others to Turkey, a country which is actually ruled by the Muslim Brotherhood. And then they were shipped into northern Syria, and that same butcher, that same fighter, that same fanatic enemy of civilization, I must call him, who was fighting in Benghazi against Gaddafi, has then gone on to benefit from a few days in some nice Turkish hotels, was then transferred into Syria to fight against Assad, was defeated in Syria, and is now transmogrified into ISIS, which is now spreading in Iraq. This could be the same person. And nevertheless, the entire U.S. foreign policy, as articulated by a spokesperson like Andrea Mitchell, Mrs. Greenspan, Mrs. Federal Reserve, her argument is that if the U.S. had only bombed Syria last year, there would be no ISIS this year. No, this is a continuity. The same forces, the same people, in some cases the same equipment, the same officers, from Libya, anti-Gaddafi, to Syria, anti-Assad, winning in Libya, reducing the country to chaos and the collapse of civilization, into Syria, where they were defeated so far by the modern state, and now an attempt to do the same thing in Iraq. And then, of course, they'll move on. They'll try to move on to Iran. They'll try to move on to Jordan, Saudi Arabia, who knows, Lebanon. And then we've also got this problem with Hamas, which is really something similar. Now, there's also this contradiction. The U.S. intelligence apparatus works on its own. It's not there thanks to Obama. It's not the friend of Obama. Does Obama control it? Well, sometimes, but I think rarely. So the CIA does what it wants. We're noting the 40th anniversary of Nixon resigning during Watergate. What was that? Well, that was the CIA ousting a president in crude terms. You go back and look at the protagonists of Watergate, what will you find? Howard Hunt, the head of the plumbers, the dominant personality in any case, a classic, legendary Cold War CIA agent. And if that's not enough, then James McCord, a technical expert, right? CIA Office of Security. Watch out for them. General Gaynor. And then, of course, other people like Gordon Liddy of the FBI, Bob Woodward of the Office of Naval Intelligence, and so on down the line. The effect of Watergate, the goal of Watergate, is to weaken the presidency. And we're being told this week the U.S. presidency was decisively weakened through Watergate. Yeah, because if the intelligence spooks are allowed to oust a president, obviously taking advantage of Henry Kissinger and other nefarious individuals. But if the CIA can oust the president, well, then the CIA is more powerful than a president. Everybody remembers J. Edgar Hoover's ubiquitous files with all the dirt on every elected official. Well, that's the CIA has got that and more, because they have, much more what can we say, élan in terms of the active measures side of things. So we now get to a situation where the CIA and the Saudis and NATO intelligence have created this ISIS. We remember who it is, right? ARM, Abdul Rahman, ARF, Abdul Rahman Faisal, right? Brother of Prince Turki, brother of Prince Faisal, the foreign minister. He's the patron, right? The British used to have, under the patronage of Her Majesty or Her Royal Highness or whatever. In this case, it's under the patronage of ARF, Abdul Rahman Faisal. So now we get a kind of this mass of contradictions. At the end of this, we've got this humanitarian emergency. Now, let's just stop here. The humanitarian emergency, is it real or is it a fraud? We remember Amanpour, for example, in Bosnia, saying, 100,000 Bosnians are going to be killed or have been killed. And, of course, this was a complete fraud. So the first thing we have to ask ourselves is this story true? Are there really these Yazidis, this religious group of ancient faith, a very characteristic singular religion, but are they really on that mountain, and are they really going to die? And is it really 40,000 Yazidis and a total of 200,000 refugees whose lives are in danger at the hands of ISIS? Well, I obviously would be skeptical to begin with, but then here's what I would point to. Is there some institution that might compel at least a certain amount of attention? And I think there is. It's the Vatican under Pope Francis. And we'll get back to this in a second here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley, Washington, D.C. Take a look, as usual, at tarpley.net. And there I've had a fairly active week on various radio programs. Tom Kiley, Jeff Rentz, different commentaries. In particular, this issue of World War I. We don't have time to do too much more on World War I this week, but it will be going on, right? Because we're going into the phase of the Battle of Frontiers, right? That the The worst day of the French army in the entirety of World War I was, I believe, August 22nd, August 23rd, with about 27,000 casualties on a single day. And that matches the British losses at the Battle of the Somme in the summer of 1916. But take a look at that. And above all, the news is a new document which points to the role of George V in telling Earl Grey, Foreign Minister Sir Edward Grey, telling Earl Grey, you've got to find a reason to get us into war. You must find a reason, Grey. And then, as if Grey needed it, pointing out, as soon as the Germans entered Belgium under the Schlieffen Plan, we'll talk about the Schlieffen Plan this month. This is the month 100 years ago when the Schlieffen Plan failed. Would have been better for civilization for the Schlieffen Plan to succeed. It would have ended this war in short order. That would have been better than any possible subsequent alternative. But despite our reservations about the German system, 25 million dead outweigh, and the catastrophe of civilization, communism, fascism, depression, World War II, Cold War, everything, right up to the present time. And these one-sided treaties, right? Versailles, Sèvres, Trianon, Saint-Germain, Neuilly, disasters for the world. And that's what we're living through in terms of Israel, Palestine. That's also what we're living through in terms of Syria, Iraq, and to some degree also Ukraine. So all of that you find on tarpley.net. And for your summer reading, I recommend, since Little Rand is running for president, if we have time, we'll talk about Little Rand skedaddling when the hot issue of comes up, and he's sitting with the reactionary racist. He's palling around with Steve King, that monster of racism, xenophobia, and reaction. And a dreamer comes up and says, why are you persecuting us? Little Rand runs. And that sums up the tremendous contradictions in Little Rand's effort to run for president based on no qualifications whatsoever. Weaker than Obama in that regard. Absolutely nothing to point to. Maybe his membership in the Nosy Brotherhood and his idolatry of Aqua Buddha back at Baylor. But we'll talk about this in coming weeks. So let's now look. Obama last night says the U.S. will do two things: bomb ISIS and make these humanitarian relief drops to the refugees on the mountain and elsewhere. Hollande of France is supporting. Actually, the French were out in front. Fabius, evil though he is, nevertheless, and this, again, contradictory, this mass of contradictions because of this policy that if you're a jihadi in Syria, you're a good guy, but if you're a jihadi in Iraq, you're a bad guy, and you don't cross the border because then you're going to be bombed. Many problems here. France, of course, traditionally the protector of the Christians in the Levant is France. That's several hundred years worth. Deep institutional forces, interest in Lebanon and stuff like that, going back to Sykes-Picot. But let's look a little bit further. Can we take this humanitarian situation seriously? Is it for real? And I'm inclining to think, yes, we can, not because of anything Obama or NATO governments say, but because of the Pope taking it seriously, right? You want to look for a man of character, a person of character. Who could that be? Well, I think Pope Francis is such a person. Now, he has put out, essentially, Francis has done three things in the last week or two. The first I would point to that I'm aware of is on Sunday, I believe, in the Angelus in St. Peter's Square. He called attention to a humanitarian emergency emerging in northern Iraq. Then between Wednesday and Thursday, he put out a another warning, another attempt to call world attention to it, that many Iraqis, religious minorities, but he, of course, pays special attention to the Christians, are in grave danger in northern Iraq. And then Thursday, that is to say yesterday, in my time frame, and that would be the 7th of August, he called on world governments to take measures to protect Christians driven from their villages in northern Iraq and provide them with humanitarian aid. So Francis says the world community should, quote, put an end to the humanitarian drama underway and adopt measures to protect those who are threatened by violence and assure them necessary aid, especially urgent for those who are homeless and depend on the solidarity of others. And he also refers to the fact that many of these Christian villages have been under Christianity for practically 2,000 years, right? We're talking the Chaldeans in particular, but also others, right? Assyrian Christians to be found there. Naturally, we're concerned with all groups, but the fact is these Christians are being subjected to special attention by the ISIS butchers. Now, there's also this. This is the news now this morning. Pope Francis is sending Cardinal Fernando Filoni, Filoni. Fernando Filoni is the former apostolic nuncio in Baghdad, Vatican ambassador to Iraq, and he's the head of the Congregation for the Evangelization of the Peoples. And I take it that's what used to be called the Vatican Congregation for the non-Christians and or the non-believers. But in this case, a cardinal sent to northern Iraq for humanitarian purposes. So I would say that indicates that there really is something going on. In other words, this is not a completely fabricated Amanpour special where it's wildly exaggerated, blown out of all proportion, right? And actually, that's a provisional estimate because it's very hard to get this from afar. All right. So what do we have? The ISIS is advancing, and they've gotten weapons from U.S. arms deposits, and we'll have to continue in our next segment. World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley here in Washington, and it's the 8th of August. We're coming up on Feria Augusta, the 15th of August, holiday under the Roman emperors, and then the Feast of the Ascension. All of southern Europe now shutting down. Portugal, Spain, southern France, really all of France, Italy, Bavaria, lots of places shutting down, but we're still on watch. So this bombing, right, the U.S. has apparently bombed a couple of artillery pieces that were being used to shell a city inhabited by the Kurds. Now, let's just try to get this straight because it is complex. I would say there are 3 blocks you can more or less identify. There's the Iran-Syria-Hezbollah block, and generally that's the better one. That's the one that needs to be stronger. Then you've got this other one, the Saudi-Egypt block. Maybe Jordan can be included. That I would think is a purely opportunistic block. In other words, the Saudis, in their feud with Qatar, have got to batten themselves onto some large power. Egypt is that. Sisi needs the Saudi money. I don't think he has any love for the Saudis. The Saudis need some big country. Well, Egypt is the biggest. So I think that's an opportunistic, that's an unprincipled combination, although our sympathy, as always, goes to the Nasserist or neo-Nasserist Sisi. And then you got this other block, Qatar, Turkey, Hamas, and the Israelis, strangely enough. In other words, it's complex, but maybe the Israelis would rather go with the Saudis. I don't know. But the fact is that there's a de facto convergence. If Qatar is destroying all the Arab nation states, then the Israelis are going to be happy with that. So it's complex. And I've got to stress this thing. The Qatar, Turkey, Hamas connection is for sure, right? Remember the new emir of Qatar went to Gaza. You notice in all of this stuff, if there's a real crisis in northern Iraq, in other words, if ISIS is really the end of the world, 2 months ago, the U.S. would have bombed ISIS. And if it were really the end of the world, the Turkish army, of course, could flatten ISIS. They might at the same time flatten the Kurds, which would be counterproductive. So this is again, it's a real mass of contradictions because of all the deceptions and all the sellouts and betrayals that are going on. So where is Turkey? Where is the great Erdogan? Where's the new Ottoman emperor? Well, he's got an election on Sunday. And he's, of course, happy if ISIS attacks the Kurds and the Peshmerga. He's very, very happy with that. But then again, it doesn't look coherent from the Western media narrative point of view. All right. So we also have the fact that the Kurds have apparently been defeated. There was boundless confidence in the Peshmerga, but now we're told the Peshmerga have been defeated because the ISIS have captured so much U.S. equipment that the Peshmerga are outgunned. That's now the media line on Peshmerga. At the same time, though, inside this Kurdish coalition, there are people saying the Peshmerga officers have to be put on trial. Now, that gets us back to this whole thing with ISIS. Does ISIS prevail because it's so good militarily, or are the generals and the officers on the other side bribed by Qatar in the same way the U.S. bribed the Iraqi army at various times? You get the picture. And I think that bribery part is quite plausible because it's Qatar, right? What do they have to work with? A lot of money. So I think that's actually happening. Now, where does all this go? I'm not sure. However, it seems to me that the NATO scenario was not to bomb ISIS, right? You see there's such reluctance by Obama. Why? Because, again, ISIS is a wonderful tool to continue the work that they began in Libya and have continued in Syria and would like to export elsewhere, the destruction of all the nation states. So I think it's unlikely that the bomb of ISIS will get very muscular. I don't think it's going to be a robust bombing campaign. It's a few things just for public relations. But still, the commitment of NATO, U.S., British, and the rest, was to force Maliki out and not to do anything against ISIS, screaming that it's the end of the world, but not lifting a finger until Maliki could be ousted because he's a Shiite, he's close to Iran, or at least he was, and then it gets even more complicated. I think this also throws some light on the tergiversations of Kerry concerning Israel-Palestine. That Kerry was trying to give Hamas a success. It's plausible, so that the Hamas-Qatar-Turkey axis would be stronger. I would also point in passing, there's a 9/11 revival coming from certain quarters, certain reactionary Republican congressmen are coming forward and saying that we have the famous 28 minutes on the Saudis from the joint congressional investigation of 9/11 from 2002, and that's going to blow the lid off the Saudis. And every opportunist is jumping on this. Former Senator Graham and Congressman Jones from North Carolina and such people. What's going on? I think the idea with that, and I think some people in Britain from the 9/11 truth community in Great Britain seem to have gotten the idea that it's an attempt to bash the Saudis, and it has something to do with the U.S. wanting to support Qatar and Turkey, and therefore Hamas, against the Saudis. And that's also perhaps why Brennan is getting slammed on this the snooping issue, right? Did the CIA snoop on the senators? Well, yeah, they did. He had denied it, so now they're getting him. So the idea is that the Saudi party, Brennan, of course, former CIA station chief in Riyadh, bound hand and foot to the Saudis, he's under attack. So the idea is to revive 9/11 in a very modest way in order to slam the Saudis' blood on them. And of course, dear friends, that will not do. You got to get 9/11 Synthetic Terror Made in USA, the 5th edition with the 46 drills and exercises. And you got to tell me, how did those Saudis, Prince Bandar, of course, a genius, but a superman of diplomacy and deception, but how could he set up the 46 drills over a period of even 15 or even more years to make this happen? It just doesn't work. It's made in USA. There's no competition. There's no question about it. So there we have it. Going further, right? National Pentagon Radio this morning, this woman who's named after a brand of beer, Labatt, says that the order created at Westphalia is going down. Maybe she let the cat out of the bag. The Westphalia order is that there are independent sovereign nation states, not empires. That's the state system. It's a state system, not an imperial system. And it's not as bad as the alternatives. Of course, I think she meant Versailles, the Sykes-Picot. Remember, we wouldn't know about the Sykes-Picot if Trotsky hadn't published all of this stuff in Pravda after the Bolshevik Revolution. But Sykes-Picot was then built into the Treaty of Sèvres, and that's the bad stuff. So there's an imperialist thing. But the status quo right now is what we need. What we need, of course, is a Marshall Plan. So here are the caveats that I would say. First of all, there must be no bombing of Syria, Iran. No bombing of Syria, Iran. And Qatar has to stop backing ISIS. We'll elaborate on this in just a second. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So let's see where this goes. But we don't need sloganeering, right? We've had commentators telling us today, when it comes to Obama, you can't take his statements at face value. Wow. Really? We practically fell out of our chairs, and that, imperialists are at work. Fine. But maybe there's something more complex going on. Anyway, this is not likely to become the hinge of world fate. But again, I think there is a real humanitarian crisis and genocide. There is this technical question, the Yazidis, if this is a separate population, the idea of exterminating them, which seems to be the word from ISIS, that would be genocide. The other question is the statement from the emir of the Islamic State, that is ISIS. He wants to put his flag on the White House. Well, let's not waste too much sleep over that. Although, there are Tamerlane phenomena in world history. Go take a look at that play by Christopher Marlowe, and you'll see how sometimes in a period of social breakdown, these anti-civilization movements can sometimes take off. So what I would say is what's happening now with ISIS is not the same as Libya. It's Libya in reverse. Libya was bombing an existing government in order to help a gang of anti-civilization fanatics. What we've got now is bombing some anti-civilization fanatics, or at least pretending to, and this might be of some help to existing governments. And this is the hallmark of the situation. In this period of total world social, economic, political breakdown, any government is a potential ally. Any government. Some obviously are, Qatar. I don't know. Is that a government? What is that? It's about 60 or 100,000 people with a lot of money who destabilize the world. Maybe that's an exception. But any government is at least a potential ally. And therefore the method is work with existing governments against anti-civilization fanatics of whatever stripe, whatever religion they call themselves, right? They can call themselves born again this or born again that. That's no good. Civilization is what we need. And, of course, we're now harvesting the bitter fruits of the Arab Spring, right? The golden youth are long gone. The Islamists are getting battered. And what comes forward now is ethnic and, warlordism, right? Because that's what this ISIS actually is. So we'll be looking for Cardinal Filoni to say something. No bombing of Syria, Iran. Qatar, and indeed Saudi individuals and UAE individuals, right? Where United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, all those people, back off, stop supporting ISIS, because without that money, ISIS could not exist. Where is Turkey, right? Turkey, close your border to the crazies, and you can cut off the supply line to those people. Similarly for Lebanon. And this Maliki, right? Stop the vendetta against Maliki. We were told, the Iraqi army ran away, and that's Maliki's fault. Well, now the Peshmerga of the Kurds have run away. You're going to blame Maliki for that too? I don't think so. They're not loyal to Maliki in any sense.